Henry Fletcher hated mornings. He particularly hated mornings in the galactic junkyard he called home, a dingy, orbiting repair station cluttered with outdated tech and machinery no one wanted anymore. The faint hum of malfunctioning life support systems provided a steady reminder of how perilously close the station was to total disrepair. Henry wasn't much better off himself. Another day, another planetary council deciding that gravity drives are optional, Henry muttered to his only companion, a rusted service droid named Ware. The droid whirred in response, though it sounded more like a sneeze than an acknowledgement. Henry scratched at his unkempt hair and surveyed the mess around him. His station wasn't glamorous, but it was home. A fixer by trade and a survivor by necessity, Henry had carved out a niche, repairing what no one else could, or would. But even he had to admit he was running out of clients. As he fumbled with a coffee synthesizer that stubbornly refused to produce anything drinkable, the station's alert system blared. Henry jumped, spilling yesterday's cold coffee onto his jumpsuit. Great! What now? The holographic display blinked to life, revealing a face Henry recognized all too well. Kalar Fazine, the wealthiest and most insufferable tycoon in this quadrant of the galaxy. Greetings, insignificant speck of space dust, Kalar began, his green skin shimmering under the harsh light of his opulent ship. You've been selected for an honor that even your pitiful existence doesn't deserve. Henry rolled his eyes. Could you get to the part where you threaten me? I've got a backlog of machines to not fix. Kalar's smirk widened. By all means, continue your sarcasm. It will make your defeat all the more satisfying. Before Henry could respond, the display cut out, and the station shook violently. Outside the viewport, Kalar's enormous cruiser loomed, bristling with weapons that could disintegrate Henry's station with a sneeze. Well, Ware, Henry said, grabbing a wrench. Looks like we're skipping coffee today. Henry had no delusions about his chances in a fight. Kalar's reputation as a ruthless businessman and skilled combatant was as well known as his fondness for gaudy, gold-plated armor. Henry's best weapon was his mind, though calling it a weapon was generous. Still, he had a knack for improvisation, a talent honed by years of scraping by. As Kalar's forces began boarding the station, Henry activated every malfunctioning defense mechanism he could muster. Alarms blared, doors slammed shut, and a few ancient laser turrets sputtered to life. To Henry's surprise, they actually hit something. I'm either a genius or the universe is taking pity on me, Henry muttered, ducking as a stray laser blast seared past his head. Kalar himself stormed aboard moments later, a towering figure in gilded armor, his expression equal parts amusement and disdain. Do you truly think you can stop me with these relics? Kalar sneered, gesturing to the sputtering defences. Henry shrugged. No, but I'm hoping they'll at least annoy you. The ensuing battle was less of a clash and more of a comedy of errors. Henry's station, held together by duct tape and wishful thinking, became an unpredictable battlefield. Loose pipes burst, steam obscured vision, and Kalar's guards found themselves slipping on spilled lubricant. Somehow, in the chaos, Henry managed to corner Kalar in the engineering bay. Holding an oversized wrench like a makeshift sword, Henry faced the tycoon with a mixture of fear and defiance. You're persistent, I'll give you that, Kalar admitted, raising his weapon, a sleek, high-tech energy blade. But persistence isn't enough. Henry glanced at the console behind Kalar, where a critical system overload warning blinked ominously. He hadn't planned this, but it might just work. Maybe not, Henry replied, but luck's always been my co-pilot. With a wild swing, Henry shattered a pipe, releasing a burst of pressurized coolant that sent Kalar sprawling. The tycoon's energy blade fizzled out as the coolant froze its circuits. Henry wasted no time hitting the emergency purge button on the console. Kalar's ship detached from the station in a violent jolt, its systems fried by the overload Henry had triggered. The station's alarms quieted, leaving an eerie silence. "Did I win?" Henry asked aloud, his voice echoing in the empty bay. Before Henry could celebrate or panic, a new transmission came through. This time, it wasn't Kalar, but two figures Henry didn't recognize. The first was Ira, her violet skin glowing faintly as she stared at him with a mix of curiosity and irritation. Her sharp, elegant features were offset by an expression that suggested she had better things to do. Beside her stood Thriss, a taller, more imposing figure with a calm, calculating demeanour. "You are Henry Fletcher?" Ira asked, her tone clipped. Yes. Who's asking?" Thriss spoke next, her voice cool and deliberate. "You defeated Kalar VZ in combat, a feat few have accomplished. According to our traditions, you are now his successor." "Successor?" Henry blinked. "I didn't sign up for that." Ira's lips twitched, almost a smile. "It's not optional. You inherit his wealth, his influence and—" "And?" Thriss nodded. "Us. We were his wives. By tradition, we are now yours." For a moment, Henry could only gape. Then, with a strained laugh, he muttered, "Of course. Because why wouldn't that be the logical conclusion to my worst morning ever?" We sneezed in agreement. Henry sat in the cockpit of his battered station, staring blankly at the hologram in front of him. The two women projected before him, Aira and Thriss, did not appear amused by his long silence. "Perhaps," Aira said, her tone sharp, "he has malfunctioned. Should we find someone more competent to explain the situation?" Thriss raised an eyebrow, her calm voice cutting through the tension. "He is processing. Let him." Processing. Sure, that's what Henry was doing. It wasn't every day you defeated a galactic mogul by accident and then found yourself engaged, by force of tradition, to two of the most intimidatingly elegant women you'd ever seen. Processing felt like a polite understatement. "This is a joke, right?" Henry finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. "Like some sort of elaborate intergalactic hazing ritual? You beam in, freak me out, then laugh and leave?" Ira crossed her arms, the faint shimmer of her violet skin catching the dim light. "I assure you, Earthman, this is no joke. By defeating Kalar, you have claimed his status, wealth, and yes, his obligations." Thriss nodded. "Tradition dictates that as his victor, you must assume all that was his, including us." Henry leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his unruly hair. "And what if I say no? Just hypothetically." Ira's expression shifted to something resembling amusement. "Then you insult our people, our culture, and probably a dozen planetary alliances Kalar was tied to. Oh, and you'd forfeit your claim to his empire, leaving it in chaos." "Fantastic," Henry muttered, rubbing his temples. "So, no pressure." Henry was soon joined by Ira and Thriss in person. The pair arrived aboard a sleek shuttle from Kalar's now commandeered fleet, and their mere presence made the cramped confines of Henry's station feel even smaller. Ira surveyed the cluttered room with a look of mild disdain. "Charming," she said dryly, stepping carefully over a pile of scrap metal. "This must be what humans mean by rustic." "Cosy," Thriss added, though it was impossible to tell if she was being genuine or just polite. Henry gave an exaggerated bow. "Welcome to my kingdom of junk. It's not much, but the coffee is terrible." Ira rolled her eyes. Thriss, to Henry's surprise, smirked faintly. As the three settled awkwardly into the station's main room, Henry tried to break the ice. "So, tell me about yourselves. What's it like being, you know—" He gestured vaguely in their direction. "Wives," Aira supplied, her tone razor-sharp. Henry coughed. "Sure, let's go with that." Ira leaned back, folding her arms. "I was a political hostage. Kalar purchased me from my captors to strengthen his alliances. I speak 12 languages, including several no one cares about anymore, and I have no patience for incompetence." "Noted," Henry said, raising his hands defensively. Thriss, sitting with perfect posture, added, "I was a military strategist. Kalar recruited me for my expertise in logistics and warfare. I stayed because it was advantageous." Henry tilted his head. "Advantageous how?" Thriss's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "Survival." The weight of her words silenced him, the humour dying in his throat. These women weren't just extensions of Kalar's ego, they were survivors, each in their own way. "So," Henry said after a moment, "what happens now?" Era quirked an eyebrow. "That depends on you, Earthman. What kind of husband do you intend to be?" Henry's laugh was nervous and abrupt. "Husband? Oh, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm barely qualified to be someone's roommate." Thriss gave him a measured look. "You've already proven yourself more capable than you believe." "I defeated Kalar by accident," Henry protested. "I tripped over a pipe and hit a button." Era's lips curved into a sardonic smile. "Luck is a skill in itself, Henry Fletcher. The galaxy values results, not methods." As the hours passed, the trio began to navigate their strange new reality. Henry discovered that Kalar's culture was steeped in rigid traditions, many of which Ira and Thriss had chafed against during their years under his control. "This isn't a partnership," Ira explained over a shared meal of synthesized ration. "It's ownership. Kalar treated us as assets, not equals." Thriss nodded. "But we are bound by the customs of our people. Without a legitimate successor, chaos will spread through Kalar's holdings. You stepping into his role stabilizes the balance of power." Henry groaned, slumping in his chair. "So I'm not just a husband. I'm a glorified placeholder." "Precisely," Era said, her tone just shy of smug. Henry ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of it all. "Okay, fine. I'll play along for now. But if we're doing this, we're doing it my way. No treating people like property. No cold, calculating power plays. Deal?" Era exchanged a glance with Thriss, the two women communicating silently in a way that made Henry feel distinctly out of his depth. Finally, Thriss spoke. "We'll consider it." "Progress," Henry said with a weak smile. As the day wore on, the tension began to ease slightly. Henry's self-deprecating humour started to wear down Ira's sharp edges, and Thriss seemed almost intrigued by his chaotic problem-solving. At one point, Henry caught Ira smirking as he tried, and failed, to fix the coffee synthesizer for the third time. "You're hopeless," she said, shaking her head. "Hopelessly charming," Henry corrected, earning a laugh from Thriss, a sound he hadn't expected to hear so soon. By the time night fell over the station, the three of them were still far from a true partnership. But there was something new in the air, a glimmer of understanding, faint but undeniable. As Henry lay in his tiny bunk staring up at the ceiling, he let out a long sigh. "Well, he muttered to his droid, "this isn't how I thought my week would go, but it could be worse." Sneezed in agreement. Henry stood in the centre of a cavernous hall aboard Kalar's flagship, staring up at a chandelier that appeared to be made entirely of floating crystals. It hovered above a long table where Era and Thriss sat on either side of him, flanked by a dozen alien advisors who were, at best, sceptical of Henry's presence. The room smelled faintly of something metallic, like an overheated engine, though Henry wasn't sure if that was the ship or his nerves. He tugged at the stiff collar of his borrowed outfit, a garment Ira had insisted he wear. "Couldn't we have done this over, I don't know, a galactic Zoom call?" Henry whispered to Ira, who was busy adjusting her datapad. "This isn't Earth, Henry," she replied, not looking up. "In these matters, presence is everything. If you want to be taken seriously, you need to be here physically." Thriss, seated calmly on his other side, added, "And you need to speak carefully." "These advisors represent factions that were loyal to Kalar. They're not likely to trust you yet." Henry let out a low groan. "Great, No pressure. The table fell silent as a tall insectoid alien with iridescent wings stood. Her multifaceted eyes glimmered as she addressed Henry in a language he couldn't hope to understand. "What's she saying?" Henry muttered. "She's asking why Kalar's empire should recognize you as its leader," Thriss replied in a low voice. Henry hesitated, his mind racing. What could he possibly say to justify his position? He was just an engineer, a junkyard scavenger with no experience in politics. But then he caught sight of the advisors' faces, sceptical, yes, but also wary. These were people who had lived under Kalar's rule, under his whims, his greed, his unchecked power. Maybe they didn't need another Kalar. Henry stood, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Hi. Hello, everyone. I know I'm not what you were expecting. I'm not rich or powerful, and I don't have an army at my back. But maybe that's a good thing." He glanced around the table, trying to gauge their reactions. Kalar was... well, let's be honest, he was kind of a jerk. He ruled with fear and manipulation. I'm not interested in being that kind of leader. What I'm interested in is fixing things. Systems, alliances, people. Whatever's broken, I'll do my best to repair it. The room remained silent, the advisors exchanging unreadable glances. Henry shifted uncomfortably. "Well," he said, sitting back down, "that's my pitch. Take it or leave it." Ira muttered something under her breath, but Thriss's lips twitched in what might have been approval. As the meeting adjourned, Ira and Thriss led Henry through the labyrinthine corridors of the ship. "That was bold," Ira said, her tone teetering between admiration and exasperation. "Thanks," Henry replied. "Don't mistake my meaning," she continued. "Boldness can be an asset, but it's no substitute for strategy. You need to learn how to navigate these alliances, or they'll eat you alive." Thriss nodded. "You've gained a sliver of respect today, but it's not enough. These factions are bound by fragile agreements. If one breaks, the rest will follow. You'll need to reinforce their trust, and quickly." Henry sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "How? I'm not exactly fluent in galactic politics." "That's why we're here," Thriss said simply. Henry glanced between the two women, their contrasting demeanours somehow perfectly balanced. Ira's sharp wit and Thriss's calm logic had already saved him more times than he cared to admit. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope that he might not be entirely out of his depth. Later, as they returned to the captain's quarters, a messenger arrived with a gift, a gleaming artifact encased in a transparent shell. It pulsed faintly with an inner light, like a heartbeat. "What is that?" Henry asked, eyeing it warily. "It's a gesture of goodwill from one of the advisors," Era explained, scanning the artifact with her datapad. "Though I'd be cautious about accepting it. These gifts often come with strings attached." Thriss examined it closely, her expression unreadable. "It's a fragment of an ancient device, possibly from the Curian civilization. Valuable, but dangerous." Henry frowned. "Dangerous how?" "Curian artifacts are known for their unpredictability," Thriss replied. "They can enhance technology, but they've also been linked to catastrophic failures." Henry groaned. "Why does every gift feel like a ticking time bomb?" "Because it probably is," Ira said with a smirk. Despite their warnings, Henry decided to keep the artifact, storing it in a secure compartment. He had a feeling it would come back to haunt him, but something about it intrigued him, a mystery he couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, Henry worked tirelessly to repair the fractured alliances. With Ira's sharp intellect and Thriss's tactical insights, he began to make progress, albeit slowly. He held meetings, visited key planets, and even managed to broker a minor trade agreement between two rival factions. Each victory, no matter how small, bolstered his confidence. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. His tendency to crack jokes at inappropriate moments often earned him disapproving looks from Era, while Thriss had to intervene more than once to prevent a negotiation from going sideways. Still, Henry's unorthodox approach began to win over some of the more sceptical advisers. His genuine desire to fix things, even when he had no idea how, was a stark contrast to Kalar's calculated greed. One evening, as the ship drifted through the quiet expanse of space, Henry found himself alone in the observation deck. He stared out at the stars, their light reflecting off the glass. "Penny for your thoughts?" Ira's voice broke the silence. Henry turned to see her leaning against the doorway, her arms crossed. "Just wondering how I got here," he admitted. "A month ago, I was fixing broken coffee machines. Now I'm in charge of an empire." Ira smirked. "Life's funny like that." Henry chuckled, though his laughter was tinged with uncertainty. "Do you think I can do this? Really?" Era studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "You've already surprised me, Henry. Maybe you'll surprise yourself too." As she walked away, Henry felt a small spark of determination. For the first time, he dared to believe that he might just be able to rise to the challenge. Henry stared at the Curian artifact on his workstation, its soft glow illuminating the cluttered desk. He wasn't sure why he'd kept it, given its ominous reputation and Ira's thinly veiled disdain for his decision. Yet something about it had drawn him in, a mystery that tugged at his curiosity like a loose thread. "Still, staring at it won't make it less dangerous," Ira said, entering the room. With her usual air of exasperation, Ira folded her arms. "Studying implies you have a plan." "I do," Henry protested. "Step 1. Figure out what this thing does. Step 2. Try not to blow up the ship in the process." Ira pinched the bridge of her nose, muttering something in a language Henry didn't understand, but suspected wasn't flattering. Before she could deliver another scathing remark, Thriss entered the room, her gaze flicking between Henry and the artifact. "You're both wasting time. If that fragment is what I think it is, we should consult an expert." Henry glanced up. "An expert? You mean someone who might actually know how this thing works?" "Yes," Thriss replied. "There's a historian on Vesson Prime. He specializes in Curian relics. If anyone can decipher this, it's him." Henry looked between the two women, noting the unspoken agreement in their expressions. "All right," he said finally. "Let's pay this historian a visit. But if this turns into a wild goose chase, I'm blaming both of you." Ira smirked. "Blame away. Just try not to embarrass us in the process." The trip to Vesson Prime took 3 days, during which Henry found himself increasingly drawn to the artifact. It seemed to pulse in rhythm with his thoughts, almost as if it were alive. "Have you noticed how it reacts?" he asked Thriss one evening as they shared a meal in the mess hall. She nodded. "Curian technology is often semi-sentient. It adapts to its user, learning from their emotions and intentions." Henry frowned. "That sounds unsettling." "It can be," Thriss admitted, "but it's also why their artifacts are so valuable and so dangerous. They can amplify strengths, but they can also magnify flaws." Henry leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words settling over him. He wasn't sure he wanted something that could magnify his flaws. He had more than enough of those already. Vesson Prime was a planet of towering spires and lush gardens, its cities blending seamlessly with the natural landscape. Henry couldn't help but marvel at the sight as their shuttle descended onto a landing pad. The historian, a wiry alien named Dravik, greeted them in a sprawling library filled with artifacts and ancient texts. His 4 eyes widened when Henry presented the Curian fragment. "This is remarkable," Dravik said, his voice trembling with awe. "A piece of the resonance matrix. I haven't seen one in decades." "Great," Henry said. "What does it do?" Dravik hesitated, running a clawed hand over the artifact. The resonance matrix was designed to amplify energy, physical, mental, emotional. In the right hands, it can heal or create. In the wrong hands. He trailed off, his expression darkening. "Let me guess," Henry said. "Boom," Dravik nodded grimly. "A catastrophic boom." Ira crossed her arms. "And how do we ensure it doesn't end in catastrophe?" Dravik turned to her, his expression grave. "By learning its song." Henry blinked. "Its song?" "The Matrix is attuned to its user," Dravik explained. "It resonates with your emotions and intentions. To wield it safely, you must harmonize with its frequency. Otherwise—" "Boom," Henry finished, rubbing his temples. "Of course." Back on the ship, Henry found himself alone with the artifact once more. Dravik had given him instructions on how to listen to the Matrix's resonance, but the process felt impossibly abstract. "You're overthinking it," Thriss said, appearing in the doorway. Henry jumped. "How do you do that? Sneaking around like a ninja?" Thriss ignored the question, stepping into the room. "The Matrix reacts to instinct, not analysis. You're trying to force it to reveal itself. Let it come to you." Henry sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Easy for you to say. You're like a super spy. I'm just a guy who used to fix vending machines." "Instinct isn't about skill," Thriss said calmly. "It's about trust. Trust yourself, and the Matrix will follow." Henry stared at her for a long moment, her words echoing in his mind. Trust himself? That sounded like a recipe for disaster. But as he reached out to touch the artifact, he felt a faint hum beneath his fingers, a rhythm that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. For a moment, he felt weightless, as if the boundaries of his body had dissolved. The hum grew louder, resonating through his very being. When he opened his eyes, the artifact was glowing brightly, its light illuminating the entire room. "Well," Henry said, his voice shaky, "that's new." The artifact's activation brought with it a surge of energy, a sensation Henry could only describe as exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. He felt stronger, more aware, as if he could sense the very fabric of the ship around him, but the power was wild, untamed. He struggled to control it, his thoughts spiraling as the Matrix amplified every flicker of doubt and fear. "Focus," Thriss said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Henry gritted his teeth, forcing himself to breathe deeply. Slowly, the energy began to stabilize, the light of the artifact dimming to a steady glow. "You did it," Thriss said, her tone tinged with surprise. Henry let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, let's just hope I don't accidentally blow up the galaxy." Ara entered the room then, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the glowing artifact. "What did you do?" I harmonized," Henry offered weakly. Ira groaned, running a hand through her hair. "You're going to get us all killed." "Not today," Henry said, managing a grin. "Probably." As the three of them stared at the artifact, its glow casting long shadows across the room, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The hum of the resonance matrix lingered in Henry's ears long after he left the containment room. Every step he took felt unnervingly light, as though he was still tethered to the energy pulsing within the artifact. "Let me get this straight," Henry said, running a hand through his hair. "This thing can amplify energy, boost emotions, and potentially make me explode like a supernova. Great, that's totally what I signed up for." "It's a tool, not a weapon, unless you let it be," Thriss said evenly as they walked toward the ship's main deck. Her calm demeanour offered little reassurance. Hera, walking ahead of them, threw a sharp glance over her shoulder. "We don't have time for your theatrics, Henry. If the Matrix is active, it's likely sending out signals. We need to figure out how to cloak its energy signature before every scavenger, warlord, and pirate in the galaxy comes sniffing around." Henry frowned. "You're saying this thing is basically a giant beacon?" "Fantastic. Just what I needed. More uninvited guests." Thriss tilted her head slightly. In fairness, you are unusually adept at attracting chaos. Henry groaned. Is that your way of saying this is all my fault? It's not your fault, Era muttered, pulling up a holographic map of nearby space. Their conversation was cut short by an alert from the ship's console. The proximity sensors flared red, warning of an unidentified vessel approaching their position. Ira's hands moved quickly over the controls, her face tightening with concern. We've got company. Henry peered over her shoulder at the display. The incoming ship was sleek and predatory, its black hull reflecting no light. It was a design he didn't recognize, but the chill running down his spine told him everything he needed to know. Who are they? He asked. Whoever they are, they're not here for a friendly chat, Ira said grimly. Thriss stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the display. That's a Revenant-class stealth frigate. Mercenaries most likely. They wouldn't engage unless they thought they had an advantage. Good news then, Henry said, attempting a weak smile. They obviously don't know who they're dealing with. Thriss arched an eyebrow. If you mean they haven't accounted for your propensity to make things worse, I'd agree. Before Henry could retort, the comms panel crackled to life, a distorted voice cutting through the tension. Unidentified vessel. Power down and prepare to be boarded. Surrender the Kiran artifact, and no harm will come to you. Henry glanced at Ira. Do they teach generic villain lines at mercenary school, or is that just a natural talent? Ira ignored him, activating the ship's shields and charging the weapon systems. We're not surrendering anything. Hold on to something. The ship lurched as Ira launched into evasive maneuvers, weaving through the black void of space with practiced precision. The mercenaries opened fire, their plasma bolts illuminating the darkness like streaks of angry light. Henry gripped the edge of a console, his heart pounding as explosions rocked the hall. So, what's the plan? Survive, Ira snapped, her fingers flying over the controls. Thriss moved with a predator's grace, analysing the enemy's attack patterns. Their shields are concentrated on the forward arc. If we can outmaneuver them and strike their flank, we might stand a chance. Henry watched as the two women worked in seamless coordination, their sharp commands and quick adjustments keeping the ship one step ahead of the mercenaries' assault. Still, the odds were against them. The Revenant-class frigate was faster and better armed, and its relentless pursuit was beginning to take its toll. I could really use a miracle right about now, Henry muttered, his gaze flicking to the resonance matrix on the nearby console. The artifact pulsed faintly, as if in response. What if I use it? Henry blurted out, pointing to the matrix. Ira turned to him, her expression incredulous. Are you insane? We barely understand what that thing does. It's either that or get blown to pieces, Henry shot back, unless you've got a better idea. Thriss hesitated, her sharp eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. Finally, she nodded. It's a risk, but it might be our only option. Ira threw up her hands. Fine, but if this kills us, I'm haunting you. Henry approached the matrix, his hands trembling as he reached for it. The artifact's glow intensified, its energy surging through him like an electric current. He closed his eyes, focusing on the rhythm he'd felt earlier, the pulse that seemed to sync with his own. The ship around him faded into the background, replaced by a swirling sea of light and sound. He could feel the Matrix's power, raw and untamed, waiting to be shaped. With a deep breath, he willed the energy outward, imagining a protective barrier enveloping the ship. The Matrix responded, its glow flaring as the energy took form. A shimmering field of light surrounded the ship, deflecting the mercenaries' attacks. The plasma bolts that had once threatened to tear them apart now fizzled harmlessly against the barrier. Ira's jaw dropped. How did you... Later, Henry said, his voice strained. The effort of maintaining the barrier was taking its toll, sweat dripping down his face as the Matrix's energy coursed through him. Thriss seized the opportunity, coordinating a counterattack that targeted the mercenaries' exposed flank. The ship's weapons roared to life, unleashing a barrage that disabled the enemy's engines. The Revenant-class frigate drifted, its systems crippled. Ira quickly activated the ship's jump drive, plotting a course to safety. As they escaped into hyperspace, the Matrix's glow faded, leaving Henry slumped against the console. "Never doing that again," he panted. Ira helped him to his feet, her expression a mixture of awe and exasperation. "You're lucky that worked," Thriss nodded, her calm exterior betraying a hint of respect. "Luck or not, you saved us. But the Matrix's power comes at a cost. You need to be careful." Henry managed a weak smile. "Careful isn't really my style." As the ship hurtled through the stars, the artifact sat quietly on the console, its faint glow a reminder of the power and danger it held. Henry woke to the faint hum of the resonance matrix, its glow casting long, eerie shadows on the walls of his quarters. Despite the recent chaos, sleep had been elusive. His mind raced with images of the mercenary ship, the searing energy he'd summoned, and the strange, almost sentient presence he'd felt within the artifact. The ship's soft vibrations beneath his feet reminded him of their precarious position. They were safe for now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the mercenaries were just the beginning. A sharp knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Ira stepped in, her expression stern but lacking the usual edge of annoyance. "We need to talk," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Good morning to you too," Henry quipped, sitting up on his bunk. Ira didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. "You need to understand what you're dealing with. The Matrix isn't a toy, Henry. If you keep using it like this, it's going to kill you. Or worse." Henry sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't exactly have a choice back there. It was that. Or let those mercenaries turn us into space dust." "I get that," Ira said. "But you can't keep gambling with your life and ours. This thing might have saved us, but it's dangerous. We need to figure out how to control it." Henry nodded reluctantly. "So what's the plan? More harmonizing lessons?" Ira's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Not quite. Thriss has a lead on someone who might be able to help, an exile who knows more about their technology than anyone else alive." "An exile?" Henry asked, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds promising." "It's our best shot," Ira said. "But finding them won't be easy. They've gone off the grid, and their last known location was in the Oris Rift." Henry's stomach sank. The Oris Rift? The place where ships go in and don't come out? "That's the one," Era said. "Still feeling brave?" Henry groaned, dragging a hand down his face. "Why do I get the feeling my bravery isn't optional?" The journey to the Oris Rift was uneventful, though the looming threat of what lay ahead cast a shadow over the crew. The Rift was a region of space known for its treacherous gravitational anomalies and unpredictable energy surges, a graveyard for explorers and scavengers alike. As they approached, the ship's sensors began to glitch, the displays flickering with static. Ira adjusted the controls, her jaw tight as she navigated through the swirling void. "Is it too late to turn back?" Henry asked, half joking. "Yes," Ira replied without looking at him. Thriss was seated nearby, her gaze fixed on the readouts. "The rift is unstable, but there's a pattern to its chaos. If we can sync our navigation systems to the Matrix's resonance, we might be able to chart a safe path." "Wait," Henry said, holding up a hand. "You're saying we need to use the Matrix to get through this death trap?" "Precisely," Thriss said. Henry looked at Ira, hoping for support, but she simply nodded. "She's right. It's risky, but it's our only chance." Henry sighed. "Of course it is." Reluctantly, Henry activated the Matrix once more. Its glow filled the cockpit, casting a warm, pulsating light that seemed to steady the ship's erratic movements. Closing his eyes, Henry focused on the artifact's rhythm, letting it guide him. The chaotic pull of the rift began to make sense, its turbulence aligning with the matrix's resonance. "Got it," Henry said, his voice strained. "Follow that path." Ira nodded, steering the ship through the swirling maelstrom. The tension in the cockpit was palpable, each second feeling like an eternity as they dodged gravitational eddies and energy surges. Finally, the turbulence subsided, and the ship emerged into a calm, starlit expanse. Henry let out a shaky breath, slumping back in his seat. "We made it," he said, barely believing the words. "For now," Thriss said, her tone cautious. Their destination was a small, desolate moon orbiting a dying star. The Kiran exiles' home was a crumbling structure built into the side of a jagged cliff, its exterior covered in glowing glyphs that shifted and shimmered as they approached. The exile himself was a wiry figure draped in flowing robes, his face obscured by a veil of intricate metalwork. He greeted them with a voice that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. "I am Varric," he said, his tone measured. "You seek knowledge of the resonance matrix?" "Yes," Ira said, stepping forward. "We need to understand its power and its dangers." Varric studied them for a long moment, his glowing eyes lingering on Henry. "The matrix has chosen you," he said, "but its choice is not a blessing. It is a test." Henry shifted uncomfortably. "Great, another test, just what I needed." Varric ignored his sarcasm, gesturing for them to follow. He led them into a cavernous chamber filled with Kiran artifacts, each one pulsing with the same ethereal energy as the Matrix. "The Matrix is a fragment of a greater whole," Varric explained. "Its power is vast, but it is incomplete. To control it, you must understand the balance between creation and destruction." "And how do I do that?" Henry asked. Varric's eyes gleamed. "You must learn to see the truth within yourself. The Matrix reflects its wielder's essence. If you cannot master your own fears and desires, it will consume you." Henry swallowed hard, the weight of Varric's words settling over him. No pressure, then. As Varric guided Henry through a series of exercises designed to attune him to the Matrix, fragments of the artifact's history began to surface in his mind. Images of ancient Kiran civilizations, their rise and fall intertwined with the Matrix's power. He saw cities built on floating islands powered by the artifact's energy. He saw warriors wielding its destructive force in battle, and he saw the devastation it caused when that power spiraled out of control. "It's not just a tool," Henry said quietly, his voice trembling. "It's alive." Varric nodded. "The Matrix is a conduit for the universe's energy. It amplifies what lies within. To wield it, you must confront the truth of who you are." Henry closed his eyes, the images of the past fading into darkness. For the first time, he truly understood the responsibility he carried and the danger that lay ahead. Henry sat alone on the ship's observation deck, staring out at the vast expanse of stars. The resonance of the Matrix still hummed in the background, its presence almost comforting now that he had come to understand it, at least somewhat. He had spent the last few days with Varric, learning about the artifact's true nature. The Kiran exile's cryptic lessons had shaped him, forced him to confront parts of himself he had rather ignore, and somehow, in the process, made him feel more whole. But still, there was an uneasy sense of finality hanging over him. The Matrix had offered him immense power, but with it had come a truth he hadn't been ready to face. Every choice he made now carried weight, not just for him, but for everyone in his life. Ira, Thriss, and even the wives of the alien warlord he'd defeated. They were all bound together by fate in ways he couldn't yet understand. A sudden vibration in the hall snapped him from his thoughts. Ank's voice came through the intercom. "Hendry, it's time. We've located the warlord's fleet. They're closing in fast." He stood up, his stomach tightening. The mercenaries weren't the only threat. The warlord's empire fire was vast, and they were outnumbered. But he wasn't the same man who had stumbled into this mess weeks ago. He had learned, he had grown, and now he had power, the kind that could tip the scales. "I'm on my way," he replied, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that lingered in his chest. The ship slid through the galaxy like a shadow, making its way toward the enemy fleet. Ira piloted with the same precision as always, her sharp eyes darting from one readout to the next. Thriss was at her side, her focus unwavering. Henry stood in the back of the cockpit, his hand resting on the cold metal of the resonance matrix. He felt it thrum beneath his fingertips, almost alive. The artifact had become a part of him now, its energy intertwined with his own. "We can't fight them head-on," Ira said, her voice tense. "They've got at least 5 warships, heavily armoured and shielded. We'd be torn apart before we even got close." Henry nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. "Then we don't fight them directly. We use the Matrix." Thriss glanced at him, a glimmer of doubt in her eyes. "You're not planning to use it like last time, are you? The Matrix's energy isn't something to wield recklessly." "I'm not reckless," Henry replied, though he knew the word sounded hollow even to him. "But we don't have much of a choice." I returned to him, her eyes narrowing. "So, what's the plan exactly?" Henry took a deep breath. "We create a disruption. The Matrix's power can interfere with their systems, disrupt their communications, scramble their targeting systems. They won't be able to coordinate an attack. We slip in and disable their shields." Thriss nodded slowly, as if weighing the risks. "And once their shields are down—" "We disable their engines one by one," Henry said. "We take their fleet apart from the inside." There was a long pause. Then I returned the ship toward the incoming fleet. "Let's do it." The first volley of plasma fire streaked toward them as they neared the enemy ships. Henry closed his eyes, focusing on the Matrix. He felt the energy surge through him, sharp and electrifying, as he pushed the artifact's power into the surrounding space. The Matrix responded, amplifying his will and sending a wave of interference through the fleet. The warship's communications lines went dead, their weapons faltered, and their shields flickered. The fleet fell into disarray, unable to coordinate a unified attack. Ira seized the opportunity, weaving the ship through the enemy's ranks with expert precision. They were moving too quickly for the enemy to lock onto them. Thriss fired off a volley of shots, disabling one ship's engines before moving on to the next. Henry could feel the Matrix's energy draining him, its power consuming his focus. It was taking everything he had to maintain the disruption. Sweat dripped down his face, and his vision blurred at the edges. "You've got to hurry," he rasped, his voice thick with strain. Ira pushed the ship even faster, dodging incoming fire. Another warship fell, its shields collapsing under the combined assault. The enemy fleet was in chaos. Henry pushed harder, driving the Matrix's energy deeper into their systems. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last warship was disabled. The once mighty fleet was now crippled, drifting helplessly in space. Henry slumped back in his seat, exhausted, the Matrix's energy finally ebbing away. "It's done," Era said, her voice quiet but triumphant. "We did it." Thriss didn't look nearly as pleased. "We've won the battle, but not the war. They'll regroup." Henry took a slow, deep breath. "Then we'll be ready for them. But first, I've got a few things to take care of." The warlord's palace was a ruin. The halls, once filled with power, were now silent and abandoned. The wives who had been bound to the warlord by tradition now waited for him in a grand chamber. They had been at the heart of Henry's conflict all along, their fates tied to his own, in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. As he entered the chamber, both women turned toward him. Their eyes held no fear, only quiet resignation, and perhaps something else. something deeper. "I don't want to be your husband," Henry said softly, his voice carrying a weight that he hadn't anticipated. "This, all of this, wasn't what I wanted." One of the women, Loria, stepped forward. "You think we wanted this? We were bound by the same traditions that enslaved us, just as much as you were. You're not the only one trapped in a cycle you didn't choose." The words hit Henry harder than he expected. He had never fully grasped their plight, had only seen them as part of the price he had to pay for his victory. But now, standing before them, he understood. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said quietly. "No one asked for it," the other woman, Zira, added, her voice tinged with sorrow. "But now we have a choice." Henry's gaze shifted between the two women, their expressions filled with uncertainty and strength. "What do you mean?" Loria smiled faintly. "The Matrix doesn't just give power, it offers freedom. Freedom from tradition, from expectation. We want that freedom too." Henry looked down at the resonance matrix in his hands, realizing for the first time that it wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool for change. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. "You don't have to be bound by tradition anymore," he said softly. "Neither of you." Zira nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Then let's choose something different." The galaxy had changed. The warlord's empire was shattered, his forces scattered. But Henry's victory was not just in the battle he'd fought, it was in the choice he had made. As he stood with Ira, Thriss, and the two women who had once been prisoners of tradition, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The Matrix had given him power, but it was his choices that would define him. And in that moment, he understood that the future was not set in stone. It was a path they would walk together as equals, free from the chains that had bound them. As the stars stretched out before them, Henry knew one thing for sure. The adventure wasn't over. But whatever came next, they would face it as a team, united and free.